Dragon Quest, or Dragon Warrior as it was once known in the West, released on May 27, 1986 in Japan, and 3 years later in August 1989 in North America. The game was developed by Chunsoft and published by Enix and Nintendo in Japan and North America respectively. Dragon Quest is known as the grandfather of the Japanese RPG genre of video games. It took the more complicated Western PC-based RPG formula that usually relied on prior knowledge of tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons, and simplified it for a much wider Japanese console-based audience. And as we know now, this style of RPG was met with an overwhelmingly positive response in Japan. The original version of Dragon Quest I sold around 1.5 million copies over there and has been heralded as one of the greatest and most influential games of all time by many Japanese reviewers, publications, and gamers to this very day. A stark contrast to the initial reception the game received in the West. The original Dragon Warrior only ever sold around 500,000 copies at its full $50 price point. After a period of rather underwhelming sales, Nintendo decided to give the game and a strategy guide away to subscribers of the Nintendo Power magazine. At the time, a Nintendo Power subscription cost $20, so this was in effect a more than $30 decrease in price for Dragon Warrior. And as you'd expect, that kind of a deal was too much for many Nintendo fans to pass up, netting Dragon Warrior around 1 million new players. As you might have already realized, this puts the total US sales of Dragon Quest on par with that of Japan. However, to my knowledge, the price was never reduced in Japan, so that comparison of course comes with a huge asterisk. In terms of the Western reception of Dragon Quest, the reviews were overall rather lukewarm, with some reviewers really tearing the game a new one. So what's my opinion on Dragon Quest? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today, so without further ado, let's just dive right into the review. But before we do that, I'd like to mention that the version of Dragon Quest I that I played on was from the Japanese 1 and 2 collection that released for the Super Famicom in 1993, so my opinions will be largely about that version of the game. The story of Dragon Quest starts off literally the second you start up the game. Now that doesn't necessarily seem like a bad thing when you hear it like that, but you are literally thrown into a conversation with the king about saving the world from evil as soon as you start a game. All under the assumption that we are a hero capable of completing such a task. It's definitely a little jarring to just be immediately hurled into what would normally be a mid-game event so early on, but considering when this game was originally released, I can't really blame the developers too much. Not only was there very little space on a cartridge, there really weren't many games on the NES that had very compelling preludes either. To modern eyes, it will more likely than not feel strange for a few minutes, but once you get into the action, you'll forget all about the awkward start. As the king explains, you are the descendant of the great hero Roto, whose coming was foretold many years ago. A hero who would save the world from the evil reign of the Dragon King. The king then tells us that the Dragon King has stolen the Orb of Light, which was once used to keep the land free of monsters, and this allowed him and his armies to gain control of the world. As the hero, it is your job to seek out and defeat the Dragon King in order to reclaim the Orb of Light and bring peace to the kingdom once again. Oh, and the princess was kidnapped at some point too. But seriously, the whole princess side story seems really tacked on. I think the designers wanted to have a princess, but didn't want to give her too big of a role for some reason. Why not have her also be captured by the Dragon King instead of by some random monsters that brought her to some random cave you find less than halfway through the game? Just a little weird in my opinion. But getting back on track, once you finish your conversation with the king about saving the world, you are told to pick up a few helpful items from the chest the king laid out for you, and that's the end of the last forced story interaction until the end of the game. Seriously, that's it. Once the king stops talking, it's up to you to progress the story forward by figuring things out for yourself. That might sound like a bad thing, but I honestly really enjoyed the level of freedom the game gives you and the amount of thought and problem solving required from the player. In order to figure out what you have to do and where you have to go, you have to talk to the various villagers that can be found in the many villages and towns around the world. And they don't just outright say, go here and do this. They each have a small piece of the puzzle that, when combined together, give you a good idea of what you need to do in most cases. My favorite example of this is from one of the later towns you'll visit, where one villager will tell you about the legendary armor of Roto being in the possession of a certain family in town. Another villager tells you he knew someone from that family and that he knew of some buried treasure under a tree. When you finally meet the man in question, he tells you a story about how his grandpa used to run a shop in a town that was overrun by monsters, and when questioned tells you the shop was on the east side of town. By this point, you should have come into contact with a village destroyed by monsters, and if you go to the man's family's shop in that town, sure enough, you'll find the armor under the tree next to the shop. Just a really satisfying sequence of events that makes you feel like you're putting the pieces together yourself, rather than just following the rails laid out for you. It reminded me a lot of some of the older Pokemon games in the way you progress through the story. Of course, Pokemon does have its fair share of forced story encounters, but there's a lot of freedom in what you do, as well as some good information available to you if you feel like talking to the townspeople. To sum up the story events somewhat quickly, eventually you'll find your way to the grave of your ancestor, the hero Roto. where it is written that in order to reach the Dragon King, you will need the help of the 3 sages that are spread out around the world, as well as the magical items they possess. These sages are somewhat decently well hidden around the world, and each one will require you to have some sort of proof that you deserve their help, like the insignia of Roto or a magical item found deep in a dangerous dungeon. Once you gain the help of each sage, you will be able to cross the water to where the Dragon King's castle lies, but let's save what comes next for just a little bit later. Saving the princess seems to be an optional side quest, as there is no real reason that you would have to save her in order to complete the game as far as I know. I personally decided to save her on my playthrough for the sake of completion, but it was really a pretty underwhelming quest. Just kill the dragon that blocks the entrance to her room, carry her back to the castle, and that's it. She gives you an item that lets you check your EXP needed to the next level, but that takes up precious space in your bag, so it's actually kinda worthless. And that's pretty much all there is to know about the Dragon Quest story. There are a bunch of little side quests and obstacles to overcome along the way, but in terms of the overarching story, go to the tomb, find the sages, save the princess if you want, defeat the Dragon King, and that's it. I'll go more in detail with the ending of the game later in the review, but for now that's all you really need to know. Moving on to what should be considered the main event when it comes to Dragon Quest I, the combat. But before we talk about that, we should probably start by talking about how you actually get into combat. Like many other older RPGs like Pokemon, Dragon Quest features random encounters as its main type of encounter. If you're not familiar with the term, it just means that as you walk around, you'll randomly encounter enemies that you have to fight. However, unlike Pokemon, Dragon Quest's random encounters can take place anywhere other than in towns, so sadly you can't just avoid enemies by simply not walking through the grass. To make this system even worse, the frequency of encounters can be extremely close, sometimes even every few steps. This becomes exceedingly annoying once you become significantly stronger than the enemies in a certain area, as they don't give you much experience and only serve to slow you down. If only there was a way to stop low-level monsters from appearing when you're much higher level. Oh wait, there is. Eventually you'll unlock a spell that can be used in the overworld to stop low-level monsters like slimes from spawning for a set amount of steps, which is honestly one of, if not the most helpful spell in the game. Too bad I didn't realize what it did until way at the end of the game, because all the spell names mean absolutely nothing in Japanese. The English version seems to have much more straightforward spell names, but oh boy was it a pain to figure out what did what in the Japanese. I only found out about the repel spell because I looked it up in the manual. They really shouldn't be this hard to understand, but fortunately for us you barely ever use spells except for a select few. In my opinion, other than the healing spells and the out-of-combat spells, you shouldn't really ever need to or want to use any of the other spells. Your sword will do more damage than your damage spells in most cases, and putting enemies to sleep or sealing off their spells are not really needed when you can just heal up the damage they do to you rather easily. Okay, I'll stop whining about the spells and move on to the actual combat system already, jeez. So again, very similar to many other RPGs, Dragon Quest uses a turn-based combat system where you and your opponent take turns attacking one another. You have the option of attacking with your weapon, casting a spell, running away, or using an item. I probably don't need to explain this, but if you manage to defeat a monster in this way, you'll be awarded with experience points appropriate to the monster you beat that go towards bringing your character to his next level. When you do level up, you'll gain some combination of attack power, defense, maximum health, maximum magic power, speed, or a new spell. As you level up, you'll in turn be able to fight more and more powerful foes, helping you get closer and closer to your goal. However, if you were to fall in combat, you would be returned to the castle with half of your total gold, the currency used for buying things in this game, gone. It's honestly not that serious of a punishment considering the games that were coming out around that time would often have you restart the whole game if you died. Personally, I was really happy with this decision as the game wasn't artificially made harder by the fact that you have to replay stuff you already did, which is never fun. Just imagine if you lost levels when you died. Ugh. If you're familiar with the Dragon Quest series, you'll probably know that sometimes the games require you to grind up levels quite a bit if you want to progress in the story, which has become a rather contentious point for the fans over the years. However, at least in the version of the game that I played, there really wasn't too much grinding required. Obviously you can't just run to the last dungeon from the start of the game, but the progression of difficulty seemed very well tuned so that you didn't really have to do too much power leveling if you didn't want to. Now you might be wondering, how does an open world game with no forced story events keep you from going to areas you're not ready for yet? Well, they don't physically prevent you from going there in most cases, but the monsters in different areas vary in strength greatly, so if you wander a little too far out, you might just run into something that you're not ready for just yet and get yourself killed. This change in monster difficulty is conveyed to the player through the use of many bridges. When you cross a bridge into a new area, the monsters will get markedly stronger. There is an NPC that will let you know this fact, so if you talk to him you'll probably be okay, but if you didn't, you'll probably learn the hard way not to cross bridges too carelessly. Another way to help your character progress further out into the world and cross more and more bridges is to equip him with strong weapons and armor that can be bought in various cities, as well as found out in the wild. Some weapons and armor even have special abilities like restoring your health while out of combat, or even shooting fireballs at your enemies. One thing that I really found myself loving about this game is that as you level up and get new equipment, your character actually feels like he got stronger. The game just has great character progression from start to finish, which is honestly really surprising with how few spells and armor sets there are. This is probably due in part to the excellent length of the game. In my opinion, it was not too long and not too short, just the right length to keep you interested all the way through. Of course, this will differ from person to person, but that was my personal experience with Dragon Quest I. Now that we got the story and combat out of the way, let's move on to everyone's favorite part of the review, the artistic stuff. Like I said earlier, all of what I'm about to say pertains solely to the Japanese Dragon Quest 1 and 2 collection, so just keep that in mind. First off, the visuals. And honestly, I was really surprised at how much I liked the graphics of the Super Famicom version of Dragon Quest 1. I've seen the original version's graphics as well as those of the Switch release, and the Super Famicom graphics were by far my favorite. They look really nice while at the same time still giving you those retro game vibes. As I said in my review of Torneko no Daiboken, one of the main reasons I've wanted to pick up the Dragon Quest series for so long is the wonderful monster and character art done by Toriyama Akira, the author of the Dragon Ball manga series. I've always loved Toriyama's designs for the dinosaurs, robots, and other monsters in the original Dragon Ball, and his Dragon Quest designs are on the same level, if not better in my opinion. In fact, his designs are so iconic that if asked to draw slime, your typical Japanese person would most likely draw something close to the original slime designs from Dragon Quest. One thing that I did find just the tiniest bit disappointing though was the large number of monster recolors. They're not all super close to the original, so it wasn't really that bad at all, but I would have preferred more original designs. Of course, that's just my personal opinion. As for the backgrounds, there were a lot of samey looking areas, especially on the overworld, but overall I really like the bright colors and fun aesthetic Chunsoft brought to the table. In particular, the individual towns each looked really nice in my opinion. Next up we have the music. And when it comes to JRPGs, it doesn't get more iconic than the Dragon Quest I soundtrack composed by Sugiyama Koichi. And the Super Famicom version of the game was able to synthesize a larger number of instruments and sounds, so that just helped to more truly realize the vision Sugiyama had for the soundtrack. The biggest thing for me personally was that the overworld music was extremely catchy and very easy to listen to. This made the long time I spent out in the open world much more fun, and to me that's one of the greatest strengths of Sugiyama's music. No matter what you're doing, you always have this catchy tune playing in the background, and that makes everything you're doing just a little bit more enjoyable, sometimes even greatly so. If you've watched some of my other reviews, you'll probably know that I absolutely love video game soundtracks. And honestly, with composers like Sugiyama at the helm, it's hard not to fall in love with them. At least that's how Dragon Quest I's soundtrack made me feel. Now it's time to talk about the last boss and the ending of the game. So like I said earlier, the big bad guy of Dragon Quest I is the Dragon King who stole the Orb of Light and remains holed up in his castle. In order to get to him, we have to combine the power of the Staff of Rain Clouds and the Stone of the Sun to make a rainbow droplet at the shrine closest to the Dragon King's castle. This droplet opens the pathway needed to reach the final boss. Once inside the castle, there are a number of ways to go, but the true way to find the Dragon King is to inspect his throne and find the hidden passageway that lies behind it. After making your way down several floors and through many dangerous monsters, you'll find yourself at the Dragon King, who will give you two options. Join him and rule over half the world, or fight him to the death. Apparently, if you choose the former, the game freezes and you have to start over from your last checkpoint, but obviously, since we're the hero of this story, we're going to choose to fight him. He has two phases, the first where he'll mostly use spells and weak attacks, and the second where he turns into a huge dragon. In this phase, he has a new fire breath attack that can do basically nothing, or a substantial amount of damage depending on the type of breath he does. The first time I fought him, he used one strong breath after preemptively striking with another, and I instantly died, so watch out for that. Oh yeah, preemptive strikes are a thing that can randomly happen for the enemy or you, and are pretty self-explanatory. The Dragon King has a ton of health and will definitely take you some time to beat if you decide to face him at around level 20 like I did. Mostly I just rotated between attacking with my sword and healing myself when I got low, and I beat him without too much trouble. Once you do manage to defeat the Dragon King, the hero reclaims the Orb of Light and brings peace to the land once again. As you walk back to the castle, you realize that the monsters that used to attack you every few steps are gone, and the miasma-covered areas of the map have become fields of flowers. Once back at the castle, the king will thank you and offer to give you his kingdom, to which the hero, for the first and only time in the game, will respond that he wants to find his own kingdom. To this, the princess will ask if she can come with you, and if you say yes, she and the hero will leave the castle together on a new adventure. The credits roll as you see a montage of your adventures up to this point, and the game ends. In true retro game fashion, you have to restart your console to continue playing after this. I also very much enjoyed the ending of the game, and I really liked the design for the Dragon King in both forms. The fight was a little easy in my opinion, that's only if you get Roto's armor and sword, and didn't rush ahead at any point. All in all, a great ending to a great game. Based on what I've read and heard from other Dragon Quest fans, Dragon Quest I isn't really a game they would recommend to newcomers to the series, but I personally couldn't disagree more. I think Dragon Quest I, at least the version I played, was a very easy to understand, simplistic, and overall fun game that let the player think and figure things out for themselves without making it too difficult. I'd 100% recommend it to anyone interested in Dragon Quest, or just RPGs in general. Even if you've never tried a JRPG before, definitely give this one a try if you can. As for what version to get, I'd say if you can, try to get the Super Famicom version. The official cartridge release that I played on is only available in Japanese as far as I know, but I'm sure there are fan translations available through a number of different means, wink wink. If you don't feel like doing too much work, just go for the Switch version. It's cheap, easy to find, and you can play it wherever you want. I'm pretty sure it's the same as the phone version of Dragon Quest I, which isn't necessarily a great thing, but it's far from unplayable. It's really a great game, so I'm sure whichever version you decide to pick up, you'll have a great time with. And I guess that pretty much wraps up this review. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to watch all the way to the end of the video. It always means a lot to me. If you had a good time here today, consider giving the video a like. It really helps me out and is always greatly appreciated. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, consider subscribing as well. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. Ack out. Make sure you don't get messed up and accidentally buy Dragon Quest the tabletop RPG. Completely unrelated to the video game.